At my 30th birthday dinner, my mother grabbed the mic, smiled, and told 40 guests I was adopted for the tax write-off. My sister cackled, my dad stared at his plate, and then I reached into my purse for Grandma's sealed envelope right there. Friend, what would you do next? If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. My name is Marla Bennett, I'm 30, and I need you to picture this like you're sitting at the next table over, because what happened at my birthday didn't feel like a family moment. It felt like a public execution with dessert on the side. Boston, Saturday night. One of those upscale places where the water glasses never go empty and the servers glide like they're on rails. My mother, Patrice, had booked a private room. Not a booth, not a corner, a whole room, 40 guests, linen so white it made your teeth look yellow, candles flickering like they were trying to warn me, and a cake the size of a steering wheel sitting at the end of a long U-shaped table, right in front of my seat like I was the guest of honor in a courtroom. And the weird part is, for the first 15 minutes, I almost believed it. I almost believed she was finally doing something kind. Because for 30 years, Patrice didn't do grand gestures for me. She did reminders. Reminders that I should be grateful. Reminders that I was lucky. Reminders that she took me in. She loved that phrase. Took me in. Like I was a stray cat she fed once and never let forget it. But that night she was hugging people, doing that social smile that makes her cheeks look lifted and her eyes look empty, and she kept calling me sweetheart. So often it sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror until she could say it without gagging. My father, Gary, was there too, polite in the way a man is polite when he's trying not to be noticed. He shook my hand like I was a coworker at a holiday party. My younger sister, Tessa, was filming the room on her phone like it was content, like my life was just a set piece for her feed. And then I saw Aunt Lenora, my grandma's sister, the one person in my family who hugs like she means it, and when she wrapped her arms around me, she whispered, low and urgent, "Whatever happens tonight, don't let her steal your voice." I pulled back and tried to laugh it off, but she didn't laugh. She just looked at my purse like she knew what was inside, and my stomach did that slow drop like an elevator cable snapped. Because in my purse was an envelope, thick, cream-colored, sealed, with my grandmother's initials pressed into the wax, and I'd been carrying it for a week like a secret heartbeat. Let me back up just enough so you understand why that envelope mattered, because this didn't start at the restaurant. It started with a phone call that made my hands go cold while I was still at my desk. I'm an architect, the kind who stays late because buildings don't care about your feelings, and it was a Thursday, almost 8 p.m., the office mostly empty, the air smelling like printer ink and stale coffee, and my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Boston area code. I almost ignored it, but something in me answered, and a man's voice came through, calm and careful, like he was holding a glass vase. "Miss Bennett," he said, "my name is Theodore Wainwright. I was your grandmother Eleanor's attorney. There's something she left for you. It must be discussed in person, and she gave strict instructions that nobody else in your family is to know about this meeting." When I tell you my heart started punching my ribs, I mean it. My grandma Eleanor was the only person in that family who ever made me feel like I wasn't a mistake. She'd squeeze my hand under the table when Patrice made one of her jokes. She'd slit me extra pie and whisper, "You're allowed to take up space." And once, when I was a teenager crying in her garden because Tessa had told me I wasn't real family, Grandma leaned in and said, "One day you'll understand why you're here, and it's bigger than you think." I never understood what she meant, but when her lawyer said she'd left something for me, and only me, my whole body went alert like a smoke alarm. We met the next morning. His office smelled like old books and money. He sat me down, slid a large sealed envelope across the desk, and said, "Your grandmother prepared this 5 years ago, when she was of sound mind. She asked me to deliver it only after her passing. The will becomes public in 2 weeks. She wanted you to have time. Time for what? He didn't answer right away, just looked at me like he'd seen families explode before. Time to prepare for how your family may react. I opened the envelope with shaking fingers, and the first thing I saw was legal language, clean and brutal in its calmness. Then my name, Marla Bennett, and then words that didn't make sense. The Bennett house and estate, along with all property and contents therein, to be transferred in full to my granddaughter, Marla. I stared at the line until the letters blurred. The Bennett house wasn't just a house. It was the family's throne. Holidays, reunions, charity photos. The place Patrice treated like it was already hers. The place she redecorated every season like she was curating a museum of her own importance. That house had been hanging over my head my entire life, like a reminder that I was a guest in someone else's story. And now it was mine? The lawyer watched my face shift through disbelief into dread and said, "Your grandmother also included a personal letter and a smaller sealed packet she instructed you not to open unless absolutely necessary." He didn't smile when he said necessary. He said it like a doctor talks about surgery. I went home, waited until midnight, and read Grandma's letter under one dim lamp like it was contraband. She wrote, "You are not a stranger. You are not a charity case. You are my blood, my real blood. I can't explain everything here. This smaller packet contains proof. Open it only when you must, when you're ready to face what it means." I read that line so many times it felt carved into my eyes. My blood, my real blood. And I didn't open the smaller packet that night. I couldn't, because if I opened it, I'd be admitting that my whole life had been built on a lie big enough to crush me. So I sealed it back up, locked it in my safe, and tried to breathe like a normal person. And then, that same night, Patrice texted the family group chat announcing my surprise 30th birthday dinner at the most expensive restaurant she'd ever stepped foot in, and I remember staring at the word sweetheart on my screen and thinking, this is either a miracle or a trap. Now here we were, at the trap disguised as a miracle, and I'm sitting in that ribbon-wrapped chair at the center of the U-shaped table, my purse in my lap, the envelope inside pressing against my thigh like it was reminding me it existed. The room was full of people who had watched Patrice treat me like an accessory for decades. People who had heard her introduce Tessa as our daughter and me as Marla, with that pause like I was a footnote. Dinner came out, salmon, asparagus, steak for the important guests, and polite conversation floated around like perfume, sweet enough to hide rot. I almost relaxed. I almost made the mistake of believing the performance. And then Patrice stood up. She walked to the podium with the microphone like she'd been waiting her whole life for the spotlight. She tapped the mic once, and the room quieted the way rooms do when they expect a toast. She smiled at the guests, then looked at me. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "We're celebrating someone very special tonight. Marla is turning 30. There was applause, and I clapped too, because what else do you do when 40 people are watching you be applauded? My father clapped softly without looking at me. My sister's phone was up, recording. Patrice kept going, voice syrupy. 30 years. It feels like yesterday she came into our lives. Came into our lives. Not born into. Not raised by. Came into. Like a package delivered to the wrong address. Then her tone sharpened just a little, like a knife sliding out of a sleeve. And I've been thinking about Marla's journey, where she came from, what this family has done for her. My fingers tightened around my napkin under the table. My Aunt Lenora's posture changed, like she was bracing. Patrice's smile widened. We've supported her through school, through her career, through everything. We've loved her like she was one of us. Like. She paused and let that word hang. And then she did it. She leaned toward the microphone and said, bright and clear, "It's time we stop pretending. Marla was adopted. We adopted her for the tax benefits." The room didn't just go quiet. It went vacuum sealed. Like all the oxygen got sucked out, and the candles were the only things still breathing. Someone gasped. Someone laughed awkwardly like they thought it was a joke and realized too late it wasn't. Tessa burst out laughing, loud and mean, like a kid throwing rocks at a stray dog and enjoying the yelp. My father stared down at his plate like it was suddenly fascinating. Patrice kept talking because she wasn't trying to tell the truth, she was trying to brand me. "The government had these programs back then," she said, shrugging like she was explaining a coupon. "And we thought, why not? A little deduction, help a child, everybody wins. Everybody wins." She said it like she was proud. And I sat there feeling my face go hot and cold at the same time, because humiliation isn't just embarrassment. It's your body realizing it's not safe in front of witnesses. I looked around the room and saw the split-second moral test happening on people's faces. Some looked horrified. Some looked entertained. Some looked relieved it wasn't them. And I need to ask you right here, because I know who's watching this. A lot of you have lived long enough to see family act worse than strangers, so tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? What city and what time is it where you are? And be honest, if you were sitting in that room, would you have spoken up, or would you have done what most people do and stared at your plate like my father did? Because that moment is where people show you exactly who they are. Patrice ended her little speech with a fake sympathy voice. "I hope this doesn't upset you, sweetheart, but after 30 years of pretending, you deserved honesty." Pretending. Like my entire life was a costume she'd been forced to tolerate. She was waiting for me to crumble. That's what she wanted. The public collapse, the tears, the run-out-the-room scene. She wanted 40 witnesses to watch me evaporate so she could say later, "See? She's unstable. See? She's dramatic. See? She doesn't belong." And here's the thing nobody tells you until you're older. Shame only works if you pick it up and hold it. Patrice tossed it at me like a grenade, smiling, expecting me to catch it. I didn't catch it. I inhaled slowly, felt the envelope in my purse like a weight that could anchor me, and I stood up so smoothly my chair didn't scrape the floor. The room froze again because now it wasn't her show anymore. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because sometimes the only way to survive humiliation is to look like you were expecting it. "Thank you, Patrice," I said, voice steady. That was illuminating. Her smile twitched. I looked at Tessa. "Keep recording," I said, and her laugh died in her throat. Then I looked around the room and let silence stretch until people shifted uncomfortably. "You're right about one thing," I said. "It is time for truth." And I reached into my purse, slowly, deliberately, like I was drawing a card from the bottom of the deck. I pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed in wax, my grandmother's initials pressed into it like a fingerprint from beyond the grave, and Patrice's face changed in a way I will never forget, because for the first time, the woman who had controlled every narrative in our family looked unsure. She took a tiny step back from the podium, and her fingers tightened around the microphone like it might save her. I held the envelope up, so everyone could see it. "This," I said, "is from Grandma Eleanor. She told me to open it only when absolutely necessary." I tilted my head at Patrice. "And I'm starting to think you just made tonight very necessary." The room went so still I could hear the soft clink of silverware settling on plates, and I watched Patrice's throat move as she swallowed, and I realized she wasn't afraid of me crying anymore. She was afraid of what I knew. I held that wax-sealed envelope up like a mirror, and I watched the room start doing what rooms always do when the power shifts. People stopped chewing, people stopped pretending they were relaxed, and suddenly everyone remembered they had somewhere else they could be, but they couldn't leave because now they needed to know what was inside. Patrice tried to laugh first, because that's her favorite weapon when she's losing. She gave this tight little chuckle into the microphone like, "Oh, look at Marla being dramatic," and she said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, are we doing theatrics now?" And I didn't answer her right away because silence is a response too, especially when someone's been talking over you your whole life. I set the envelope on the white tablecloth in front of me, flat, centered, like evidence, and then I looked straight at the guests, not her, because she wanted this to be a mother-daughter fight she could spin later, and I wasn't giving her that. "Just so we're clear," I said, calm, "I didn't come here planning to do anything except eat dinner and pretend this was love." She made it public. She made it cruel. So if you're uncomfortable, blame the person who picked the microphone, not the person who finally picked up the truth. And right there I saw the first crack because a few people nodded. Not big nods. Tiny. The kind you do when you're trying to stay neutral, but your conscience is tapping you on the shoulder. Patrice tightened her grip on the mic. "Marla," she said, with that warning tone she uses like she's speaking to a dog chewing a shoe, "this is not the place for paperwork." I smiled small. "Funny," I said, "because 5 minutes ago you thought this was the perfect place for my origin story." Tessa snorted, still recording, and I turned my head slowly toward her. "Keep that camera steady," I said. "You're going to want the lighting to capture your mom's face in a second." That got a couple nervous laughs, the kind that sound like people coughing to hide discomfort, and Patrice's cheeks tightened because she hated when I got funny. She hated when I wasn't small. She wanted tears. She wanted trembling. She wanted me to say, "Please don't, not here." So I did the opposite. I pulled my chair back, took one step forward, so I was standing in the open space inside the U-shaped table, and I placed both hands lightly on the back of my chair like I was the one giving the toast now. "My grandmother," I said, "Eleanor Bennett, passed away 6 months ago. Some of you were at the service. Some of you brought casseroles and sympathy, and then went right back to treating me like furniture. 2 weeks ago, her attorney called me privately and asked to meet." Patrice's eyes flicked, fast, to my father Gary, and that told me something right there. She didn't look surprised. She looked irritated, like a plan had been interrupted. I continued, slow and steady, because this wasn't just revenge. This was rebalancing the room. He gave me an envelope she prepared 5 years ago. Witnessed. Documented. Legally sealed. She gave explicit instructions that nobody else in my family was to know about it before the will became public. Someone murmured, "Why?" And I held up one finger, like, "Let me finish." Because she knew exactly what could happen, I said, looking right at Patrice now. She knew what people do when they feel entitled to something they didn't earn. Patrice's smile froze. "Marla," she said, a little higher pitched now, "Sweetheart, you're upset. You've had a shock. Let's not." And I cut in clean. "Don't call me sweetheart," I said. "You used that word the way people use perfume to cover a smell." Oof. That landed. One of my mother's friends, a woman with pearls and a tight bun, actually put her hand over her mouth. Patrice's eyes narrowed. "You're being disrespectful," she hissed, and I leaned in slightly. "You're being exposed," I said, and the room did that little collective inhale again. Then I opened the envelope, but I didn't tear it like I was angry. I opened it carefully, like a surgeon, because I wanted them to feel the precision. I slid out a certified copy of the will, the kind with the stamps and the notary marks and the legal language that doesn't care how loud you are at dinner. Patrice's lips parted. Gary finally looked up, and his face was the color of paper. That was the second crack. He knew, or he at least suspected. I raised the document just high enough for the people nearest me to see. "This," I said, "is my grandmother's will. It becomes public in 2 weeks." Patrice stepped closer to the edge of the U-shaped table, her heels clicking, and she said, "Marla, You have no idea what you're doing. Put that away." Her voice had lost the performative sweetness. Now it was the real Patrice, the one I grew up with, the one who didn't like disobedience. I didn't flinch. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, and I looked around the table again. Question for everyone here, just so we're all in the same reality. If a mother tells 40 people her daughter was adopted for tax benefits, what do you think her goal is? Comfort? Honesty? Or humiliation? I let that hang, and a man near the end of the table cleared his throat like he wanted to disappear. "Because here's what I think," I continued. "I think she wanted me ashamed. I think she wanted me to run out. I think she wanted the story to be, Marla couldn't handle the truth. And then she'd use that story to do something else." I turned my eyes back to Patrice. Like contest a will. Patrice's face tightened so hard the skin near her temples looked strained. "That's insane," she said, but her voice shook on the last syllable. "And let me tell you something. You can lie with your words, but your body will still tell the truth." "So," I said, tapping the will with one finger, "since Patrice loves truth so much, let's do truth. My grandmother left the Bennett house and estate to me." The room erupted in whispers like a gust of wind went through it. "No," someone said. "That can't be." "The Bennett house?" Another voice. "The whole estate?" Patrice's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That house was meant to," she started, and then she stopped because she realized she was about to say the quiet part out loud, that she considered it hers. Tessa's phone dipped. She forgot to keep recording for a second. That's how you know something real happened. Gary gripped his napkin like he wanted to rip it in half. Patrice finally found her voice again, and it came out sharp. "That will can be challenged," she snapped. Eleanor was manipulated. And this is where I did something that felt almost unfair because it was so simple. I smiled and said, "Okay then, challenge it." Patrice blinked. "What?" "Challenge it," I repeated, louder, so the whole room could hear. "Because the will was signed 5 years ago in front of independent witnesses with video documentation, according to her attorney. Which means if you're claiming manipulation, you're accusing my grandmother of incompetence, and you're accusing the witnesses of fraud, and you're accusing the attorney of malpractice." I tilted my head. "That's a lot of people to accuse, Patrice. Are you sure you want to do that in Boston?" A few people made that little sound like, "Oh, because older Boston social circles are basically one big web of reputations," and Patrice knew it. Her eyes darted around the room, hunting for allies, and the allies were suddenly fascinated by their wine glasses. Then Aunt Lenora stood up. She didn't make a speech. She just stood, and when she stood, the room quieted because she has that rare presence of someone who has seen enough life to not be scared of someone like Patrice. "Patrice," she said, voice low, "sit down." Patrice turned red. "This is none of your business," she spit. Aunt Lenora didn't raise her voice. "It became everyone's business when you made a spectacle of a child's life," she said, and then she looked at me, not Patrice. "Finish." That one word hit me harder than applause ever could, because it was permission I didn't need, but had been starving for anyway. So I did finish, but I didn't spend it all at once, because I wasn't about to unload every bullet in the first minute. I lifted the second page, my grandmother's handwritten letter, and I let Patrice see the handwriting, because Patrice knew that handwriting. She'd seen it on holiday cards, on checks, on notes that came with gifts she pretended she didn't care about. Patrice's eyes widened, and for the first time that night, I saw something in her that wasn't arrogance. It was fear, real fear. I spoke slowly, like I was reading a verdict. "My grandmother wrote me a letter," I said, "and she said something in it that makes your little tax benefit story look even uglier." Patrice's voice went thin. "Don't," she whispered. That single word told me I was standing on the right nerve. I looked around the room again. "Can I ask you all something?"
I said.
Have you ever watched someone get treated like an outsider for years and told yourself, "It's not my place"? Because that's how this kind of cruelty survives, not just by the person doing it, but by the people watching it like it's weather. I let that sink in, and then I turned back to Patrice. "You wanted me embarrassed," I said. "But what you really wanted was me gone. Because if I'm gone, I'm not standing between you and that house." Patrice's eyes flashed. "You're paranoid," she said, but it came out like a plea. "No," I said softly. "I'm finally paying attention." And then I held up the smaller sealed packet that had been inside the envelope, the one my grandmother told me not to open unless absolutely necessary, and you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Patrice actually took a step forward like she might try to grab it, and Gary's chair scraped as he stood halfway up, torn between stopping her and pretending he wasn't involved. I kept my grip firm, lifted it higher. "My grandmother told me this packet contains proof," I said. "Proof of something my family has been lying about since I was a child." Patrice's voice sharpened into panic. "Marla, please," she said, and let me tell you, that word please from Patrice was rarer than snowfall in July, and it didn't sound like love. It sounded like someone begging you not to open the safe. I looked at her and felt a strange calm settle over me, because I suddenly understood the real reason for the party.
It wasn't to celebrate me.
It was to brand me as disposable before the will went public. It was a preemptive strike. And now everyone could see it. I placed the sealed packet on the table, kept my hand on it, and I said, clear and steady, "You all came here for birthday dinner. Instead, you walked into a family ambush. So, here's the question. Do I open this packet right now, in front of every witness Patrice wanted, or do I let her keep controlling the story the way she's done for 30 years? And I watched 40 faces turn into a jury, and I watched Patrice realize she no longer had the microphone that mattered. The room didn't answer my question out loud, but it answered anyway, because silence can vote, and the way people leaned forward, the way forks stopped midair, the way Patrice's friends suddenly stared at me like they were watching a live courtroom show, that was a yes. Patrice tried to take control back by doing what she always does when she's cornered. She went for the moral high ground she never earned. "This is disgusting," she snapped, voice shaking but sharp. "Using your grandmother's death to cause a scene at a restaurant." And I said, "You caused the scene the moment you turned my life into a punchline." Then Gary finally stood all the way up, not confident, not brave, more like a man realizing the floor is cracking under him, and he cleared his throat like he could clear the past with it. "Marla," he said, eyes glassy, Maybe we should talk about this at home." I looked at him, and I felt that old, familiar pull. The one that makes you want to protect the peace even when peace has never protected you. And for one tiny second, I almost folded, because I'm human, and humiliation makes you want to disappear. But then I remembered Patrice's microphone voice, tax benefit, never family, and I remembered Tessa's laughter. And I remembered every holiday I spent watching everyone else get chosen. And I said, "No, Gary. Home is where I learned to swallow the truth. Tonight we digest it." Patrice's nails dug into the microphone like she wanted to crush it. "You're making people uncomfortable," she hissed. I glanced around the table. "Good," I said. "Discomfort is what happens when the life finally meets air." Then I picked up the sealed packet again, felt the weight of it, not heavy like paper, heavy like history, and I turned it so everyone could see the handwriting on the front, my grandmother's neat cursive, "Open only when necessary." Patrice's breath hitched, and that hitch told me everything I needed to know, because people don't panic over nothing, they panic over exposure. "Before I open this," I said, "I want to say something to every person in this room who has ever been told to be grateful while being mistreated, who has ever been called dramatic for reacting to cruelty, who has ever been handed a fake seat at a table and then mocked for sitting down. If you've lived that, you already know this isn't about a birthday. This is about control. And then, right on cue, a man near the far end tried to lighten the moment, because there's always someone who thinks jokes can mop up blood. He chuckled awkwardly and said, "Well, at least we're getting dinner and a show." I looked at him and smiled, almost kindly. "Sir," I said, "this is not a show. This is the bill coming due." The laugh died in his throat. That's the thing, people like Patrice survive because everyone treats cruelty like entertainment until it happens to them. Patrice stepped down from the podium, slow, calculated, and she tried to move toward me like she was going to do a motherly hug, like she was going to physically close the space and steal the moment back. "Marla," she said softly, switching tones, "please, let's not do this. You've had a hard life. We were trying to celebrate you." And I almost laughed because the audacity of saying celebrate right after telling 40 people you used a child as a deduction is a kind of madness I will never understand. I took one step back so she couldn't touch me, and I said, "Do not put your hands on me. Not tonight." Her face twitched, and for a second the mask slipped and the real Patrice flashed through, the one who hates boundaries because boundaries are the one thing she can't redecorate. Tessa's phone was back up, recording again, her eyes wide now, not thrilled, just scared, because she could feel the family's little narrative slipping out of her hands too. I reached for the edge of the sealed packet, and I broke it open with my thumbnail, carefully, like I was opening an evidence bag, and the sound of the seal peeling was tiny, but in that silence it sounded like thunder. Patrice whispered, "Stop," and I didn't. Inside were 3 things. The first was a photocopy of a hospital record with my name at the top in bold. The second was a folded letter from my grandmother's attorney, stamped and dated. The third was a DNA test result summary with a lab logo and a chain of custody number. I heard someone gasp like they'd just seen a ghost. Patrice's knees actually went soft. I saw it. She grabbed the back of a chair for balance. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about inheritance. This was about identity. I held up the attorney letter first, because I wanted them to understand this wasn't gossip. It was documented truth. "This," I said, "is from Theodore Grant, my grandmother's attorney. It explains why she set this aside for me privately." I unfolded it and read just enough to make the room lock in. Marla Bennett was not adopted for tax purposes. She is the biological grandchild of Eleanor Bennett. A woman near the middle of the table said, "What?" like she couldn't compute it, and Patrice made this low, strangled sound. Not a word, more like a kettle starting to scream. Gary's face drained of color. He sat down slowly, like someone had removed his spine. "Biological," someone repeated. "So she's," and I nodded once. "Blood," I said. "Her blood." Then I raised the hospital record, and I didn't even have to read it out loud because older folks know exactly what those forms look like. Admission date, attending physician, maternal name, and in the section marked mother, it had a name that wasn't Patrice.
I didn't say it yet.
I let them look. Let them realize. Let them start doing the math. Patrice shook her head violently, like she could shake the ink off the paper. "That's fake," she rasped. "That's forged." Aunt Lenora stood again. "Patrice, stop," she said, voice hard. "Eleanor kept copies of everything. That woman kept receipts the way some people keep jewelry." I looked at Aunt Lenora, and I saw her eyes shining, not with happiness, with relief, like she'd been waiting decades for this door to open. "Now," I said, and I held up the DNA test result summary. "This is the part where you decide what kind of person you are, because you can either listen to facts or you can cling to the story that makes you feel comfortable." I turned the paper toward the guests. "This test was done when I was little," I said, "and it confirms my biological link to Eleanor Bennett." Then I glanced at Patrice. which means your entire speech about tax benefits was not just cruel. It was a lie you've been telling on purpose. Patrice's face went shiny with sweat. You don't understand, she said, voice cracking. You don't understand what I did for you. That line. That classic line. The one abusive people use when they want credit for not throwing you away. I tilted my head. Let me guess, I said. You want a medal for doing the bare minimum while punishing me for existing. A couple people actually laughed at that, quick and sharp, and Patrice flinched like laughter was a slap. Then Gary finally spoke, and his voice was barely a whisper. Marla, who is your mother? And there it was, the question that had been hovering in the air like a blade. I looked down at the hospital record again, and my hands trembled, not because I was scared, but because this is the moment where the story stops being about Patrice and starts being about me. My mother, I said slowly, is Elaine Bennett. The room froze. Older family friends exchanged looks, the kind of looks that say, oh my God, not her. Patrice's head snapped up. Don't you say that name, she snarled. And that told the room something too, because you don't forbid a name unless it's a landmine. Aunt Lenora's mouth fell open, and she stared at Gary like she was seeing him for the first time. Elaine, she whispered. Eleanor's daughter? Gary's eyes squeezed shut, and he pressed his fingertips to his forehead like the truth physically hurt. Patrice started shaking her head again, faster now, desperate. Elaine left, she snapped. Elaine ran away. Elaine was nothing. And I said, Elaine didn't run away. Elaine was erased. Patrice's lips peeled back. You're making that up, she said, but her voice was thin and nobody believed her anymore, not with papers on the table and witnesses watching her crumble. I turned to the guests again because I wanted them to understand how deep this went. You want to know why Patrice hated me? I asked. Because I wasn't her project. I wasn't her charity. I was the proof that this family's neat little image had cracks. I was the living reminder of a daughter they didn't talk about. Gary stood up again, this time unsteady, and he looked at Patrice with something that wasn't love. It was exhaustion. Pat, he said, voice breaking, we should have told her. Patrice whipped toward him. Don't you dare, she hissed. After everything I did to keep this family together, you're going to side with her? Gary swallowed. I'm not siding with anyone, he said. I'm admitting what we did. That sentence hit the room like a chair thrown across glass. Patrice's eyes went wild, and she looked around like she could still rally the crowd, but the crowd had already shifted. People weren't looking at me like a pity case anymore. They were looking at her like she was the fraud at her own party. Tessa lowered her phone again, her mouth open, mascara starting to shine in her eyes, and she whispered, Mom, what did you do? Patrice's chest heaved. She stepped backward as if the air itself was accusing her. Then she did the thing people do when their control finally breaks. She tried to leave. She turned sharply, grabbed her clutch, and took 2 steps toward the exit. But before she could slip out, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, Patrice, sit down. She stopped like she'd hit a wall. Slowly, she turned back, and her face was twisted between rage and fear. Or what? She spat. I took a breath, steady, and I tapped the attorney letter with one finger. Or I read the last page, I said. The page my grandmother said would explain exactly why you were so desperate to humiliate me before the will goes public. Patrice went completely still. Not angry still, terrified still. And that's when I knew I had been right from the start. This birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a preemptive strike. And my grandmother had seen it coming years ago and left me the one thing Patrice couldn't survive, the full truth, with dates, signatures, and a name that would turn Patrice's perfect social image into ash if I said it out loud. Patrice didn't sit down right away. She hovered there frozen between the exit and the table, clutch in one hand, the other gripping the back of a chair like the floor might tilt, and I could see the calculation running through her face because people like her don't feel guilt first. They feel risk, they measure damage, they ask themselves who is watching and what can still be controlled. And in that moment she realized something important. She realized everyone was watching me now, not her, and control had shifted. So slowly, stiffly, she lowered herself back into her chair, not because she respected me, but because fear told her this was no longer optional, and the room felt different after that, heavier, like the air had thickened with truth that had nowhere left to hide. Gary didn't sit. He stayed standing, one hand braced on the table, knuckles white, eyes locked on Patrice like he was finally seeing the person he'd been married to instead of Thierry's version of her. And I remember thinking how strange it was that it took my public humiliation for him to grow a spine. How often that happens in families like this, courage arriving late like an apology that missed the deadline. I didn't rush the moment, because silence is a tool when you've been ignored your whole life, and I wanted Patrice to sit in it. I wanted her to feel what it was like to be watched without being able to perform her way out. So I adjusted my grip on the papers, felt the slight shake in my fingers, breathed through it, and then I said, "The reason my grandmother told me to open this only if necessary is because she knew you'd never stop unless you were exposed." And that word exposed landed hard. A few people shifted uncomfortably because exposure is contagious. Nobody likes to imagine what their own secrets would look like under a chandelier. I lifted the attorney letter again, and this time I read it fully. Not theatrically, not angrily, just clean and factual, because facts are harder to argue with than emotion. And as I read about the timeline, the consultations, the notarizations, the instructions Eleanor had left about protecting me from manipulation and coercion, I watched Patrice's face tighten with every sentence, like each word peeled away another layer of the persona she'd spent decades polishing. When I finished, a woman near the end of the table whispered, "She planned this," and Aunt Lenora nodded once and said quietly, "She always did." And that small exchange told the room something important, that this wasn't a sudden betrayal. This was a long game played by a woman who knew exactly who she was dealing with. Patrice finally found her voice again, thin and sharp, and she said, "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you were raised by us." And I felt something settle in my chest when she said that, because that's the line people like her cling to, the idea that providing shelter gives you permanent ownership over someone's identity. So I looked at her and I said, You didn't raise me, you housed me." And the difference between those two things rippled through the room like a dropped plate, because a lot of people there understood it instantly. They'd lived it, they just never said it out loud. Patrice scoffed, tried to laugh it off, but it came out brittle. "Oh please, we fed you, clothed you, paid for school." And I nodded slowly. "Yes, and you reminded me of it every time I had an opinion. Every time I took up space, every time I forgot my place." And Gary flinched at that, because he remembered those moments too. The little comments, the looks, the way gratitude had been weaponized, and he finally said, "Patrice, stop." Not loud, not dramatic, just tired, and that tiredness did more damage than yelling ever could. I could feel the audience leaning in, not in a voyeuristic way anymore, but in recognition, because this wasn't just my family's story, it was a pattern people had seen in their own lives, and I took advantage of that moment to ground them again, to make sure they understood what was actually at stake. So I said, "This isn't just about who my parents are, it's about why this party happened at all." And that got their attention, because now we were moving forward, not just digging up the past. I turned my gaze back to Patrice and said, "You didn't announce that lie tonight because you wanted honesty. You did it because you were scared." And she snapped back, "I wasn't scared of you." And I shook my head. "You weren't scared of me. You were scared of what I represent." And then I let it land, the truth coming out before you could control the narrative. And I saw it click for several people at once. The timing, the sudden generosity, the expensive restaurant after 30 years of indifference, the spectacle. It all lined up now, and someone actually muttered, "Oh my God," under their breath. I leaned slightly forward, resting my hands on the table, grounding myself in the wood, and I said, "You wanted me ashamed and silent before the will becomes public, because an ashamed person doesn't fight back." And Patrice's jaw tightened so hard I thought it might crack, because that was exactly it, and everyone could see it now. Tessa stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly, and for the first time, she looked less like a spectator and more like a frightened child. "Mom, is that true?" she asked, and the room went dead quiet again, because that question mattered, not just to me, but to the illusion Patrice had built for her own daughter. Patrice looked at Tessa, and for a split second I thought she might lie again, but then she saw the eyes on her, all of them, and something in her deflated, not remorse, but resignation, and she said, "I did what I had to do." And that was enough, because when someone says that, they're admitting everything without saying it outright. Gary sank back into his chair like gravity finally caught up with him, hands shaking now, and he whispered, "Jesus," like a prayer and a curse at the same time. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile, because this wasn't a victory lap. This was a reckoning, and those are quieter, heavier, so I said, "The worst part isn't that you lied, Patrice. It's that you taught everyone else to participate in the lie." And I looked around the table as I said it, meeting eyes, letting people feel their own complicity, the laughter, the silence, the looking away, and several people dropped their gaze, because that's what happens when the mirror gets turned on the room. Instead of just one person. I paused then, let the moment breathe, and in that pause I did something intentional. I softened my voice just slightly and asked, "Where are you all watching this kind of behavior from in your own lives?" And I let the question hang because even though we were physically in a room together, I was speaking past it. To anyone who has ever been told to accept mistreatment as the cost of belonging. And I knew the older folks in particular felt it because they've lived long enough to recognize patterns repeating across generations. Patrice pushed her chair back suddenly, anger flaring again now that fear had failed her. "So what do you want?" she demanded. "An apology? Money? To ruin us?" And that question was revealing too, because it showed how limited her emotional vocabulary was. Everything was transactional, leverage or loss. So I shook my head and said, "I want the truth to stand on its own." And then I added, "And I want you to understand that you don't get to define me anymore." And that sentence felt like cutting a cord that had been wrapped around my ribs my entire life. I gathered the papers together carefully, not rushed, not shaking now, because something had settled inside me, and I looked at Patrice one last time in that moment and said, "Whatever happens next, legally or socially, isn't revenge, it's consequence." And she recoiled slightly at that word, consequence, because people like her think consequences are something that happened to other people. The waiter hovered awkwardly nearby, unsure whether to clear plates or call a manager, and the normalcy of that detail grounded me again. Life continuing even as families implode, and I realized something important then, that no matter how this ended, I had already reclaimed something Patrice could never take back. My voice, my story, my right to exist without apology. I picked up my clutch, stood slowly, not storming out, not fleeing, just standing in my full height, and I said, "I'm going to step outside for a moment," and then I added, "If anyone here has questions, I'll answer them, but I won't argue about my own life anymore." And that boundary felt solid, real, like a line drawn in wet cement that was finally starting to set. As I walked toward the doors, I could feel eyes following me, not with pity now, but with something closer to respect, and behind me I heard Patrice's chair scrape again, a sharp sound full of frustration and loss, and I knew she was unraveling, because control once lost doesn't come back quietly. It fights, it schemes, it panics, and whatever she was planning next would be bigger, messier, and more desperate than anything she'd done before. Because that's what happens when someone realizes their power only worked in the dark, and the lights have just been turned on. The hallway outside the private dining room smelled like lemon polish and expensive perfume, and the kind of quiet money that makes you whisper even when you're not doing anything wrong. And I leaned my shoulder against the wall for half a second just to feel something solid, because my legs were steady but my insides were buzzing like a live wire. And that's the weirdest part about public betrayal. You don't always feel pain first. Sometimes you feel clarity, and clarity has its own adrenaline. And I remember thinking, if you've ever had a family member try to humiliate you in public, what would you have done right there? Would you have walked out? Would you have snapped? Would you have swallowed it like you're supposed to? Because I want you to really sit with that, not the polite version, the real version. I hadn't even finished my exhale when the door behind me opened and I heard heels, fast, sharp, angry, and then Patrice's voice sliced through the hallway, low enough not to draw staff attention but loud enough to be a threat. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "You think you can waltz in here and rewrite 30 years. And I turned slowly, because I refused to look like prey anymore, and there she was, standing too close, eyes bright with that particular kind of rage that shows up when someone realizes the room didn't clap for them, and behind her Gary hovered like a ghost, torn between following her and staying loyal to whatever he thought decency was supposed to look like. And Tessa stood a few steps behind, arms crossed tight, face wet, mascara smudged, like she'd just watched her whole childhood story get ripped in half. Patrice tried to grab my clutch, not violently, but with entitlement, like it belonged to her by default, and I moved it behind me instantly, and she snapped, "Give me those documents," and I said, "No." Simple, clean, not raised, because the moment you match Patrice's volume, she gets to call you unstable, and that's her favorite trick. Poke you until you bleed, and then blame you for the mess. She leaned in, breath hot with wine and fury, and she said, "You don't understand what you've done." And I almost laughed because I understood exactly what I'd done. I'd taken her favorite weapon, shame, and I'd used it against her without even having to raise my voice, and that's what she couldn't stand, that I didn't break. Then she did what people like Patrice always do when direct control fails. She pivoted to consequences. "You're not walking back in there," she said. "You're not finishing your little speech." And she turned her head slightly, and I saw her eyes flick toward the dining room door, toward the staff, toward the hallway cameras, and I realized she wasn't just angry. She was plotting in real time. And that's when Aunt Lenora appeared, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment her whole life. Stepping into the hallway with her shoulders squared, calm as a judge, and she said, "Patrice, don't." Not as a request, as a warning, and Patrice's lip curled. "Stay out of this." And Lenora replied, "I stayed out of it for 30 years, and look what you did with the silence." Gary finally spoke then, voice cracking. "Patrice, enough," and Patrice whipped around on him. "Don't you start." And I watched this man flinch like he'd been trained to, and it hit me again how families like this work. The loudest person sets the weather. Everyone else just learns to live in it. Patrice took a step back and pulled out her phone, thumbs moving fast, and she said, "Fine, we'll do this properly." And my stomach dipped because I knew that tone, that pretend professionalism people use when they're about to do something cruel and call it necessary. And she lifted the phone to her ear and said, "Hi. Yes, I need to speak to the manager immediately." And then she glanced at me while it rang, smiling thinly, and she added, "There's a disturbance in our private room. An intoxicated guest is harassing people and making false claims about legal documents." And I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, not because I was scared of a manager, but because of the audacity, the way she could lie without blinking and still think she was the victim. And I want you to notice this. If you've ever dealt with someone like Patrice, they don't just hurt you. They try to recruit authority to do it for them. They weaponize respectability like a knife. Tessa made a small sound like a choke. "Mom," she whispered, "stop." And Patrice ignored her completely because Patrice doesn't hear people. She hears obstacles. The manager arrived within a minute, a polished man with a practiced smile, and before he could speak, Patrice started performing. "We're so sorry," she said. "This is a sensitive family matter. My relative is having a moment." And she angled her body slightly to block me, like she was trying to erase me from the hallway, and I could see the manager's eyes flick to me, measuring, deciding who looked more believable. And right there I understood something a lot of people learn too late: looking. Calm is a weapon, not because calm means you're right, but because calm means other people assume you are. So I stepped forward and I said, "I'm not intoxicated and I'm not causing a disturbance." And I kept my voice even and I said, "This is my birthday dinner and my documents were handed to me by my grandmother's attorney." And Patrice cut in. "She's confused." And I looked at the manager and said, "Sir, would you like to see the attorney's letterhead?" And I didn't shove it in his face. I offered it like a professional. And he hesitated. And that hesitation was the crack Patrice wasn't expecting, because she thought she could label me and it would stick. Aunt Lenora stepped closer and said, "I'm her aunt." And she said it with such quiet authority that the manager immediately softened, and she added, "If anyone is disrupting this evening, it's Patrice, who just publicly humiliated her at her own birthday dinner." And the manager's eyes widened slightly and he said, "Ma'am, is that true?" And Patrice snapped, "This is private." And I said, "She made it public." And that's when Patrice's face changed, not anger now, calculation again, because she realized the manager might not be her ally, and she hates variables. The manager cleared his throat. "If you'd like to continue your dinner, we can ensure privacy, but I can't remove anyone without cause." And Patrice's jaw tightened, and she forced a smile so hard it looked painful. "Of course," she said, "we just want peace." And I almost said something sharp, but I didn't, because I was watching what mattered: her pivot, her retreat, the way she swallowed her rage, because the audience wasn't guaranteed out here. Then she turned to me and her voice dropped into something intimate and poisonous. "You don't know what you're playing with," she whispered. "That house isn't yours the way you think it is." And I felt my pulse spike, because this wasn't just bluster. Patrice wouldn't say that unless she believed she had a lever, and I want you to notice something here. People don't threaten what they can't touch. They threaten what they've already been fiddling with behind your back. Gary stepped forward like he was going to say something meaningful for once, but Patrice cut him off with a look that said, "Not here, not now," and he stopped. And that was the moment I lost the last of my patience for him, because regret without action is just theater. And I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You don't get to be silent and then ask for mercy later." And his face crumpled, like I'd finally said the sentence his conscience had been dodging. Patrice grabbed Tessa's wrist, not gently, and hissed, "We're going back in." And Tessa yanked her arm back. "No," she said, voice shaking but firm. "I'm not going back in there to pretend this didn't happen." And Patrice's eyes flashed, and she did the thing toxic parents do. She went for the jugular. "After everything I've done for you." She spat, and Tessa flinched like she'd been hit. Because that line works when you've been trained to believe love is a debt you can't repay. Aunt Lenora stepped between them, and she said, "Patrice, do not use guilt as a leash." And Patrice laughed, sharp and ugly. "Oh, now you're a therapist too." And Lenora replied, "No, I'm just old enough to recognize cruelty when it's wearing pearls." The manager cleared his throat again, uncomfortable now, and I saw staff at the end of the hall pretending not to watch while absolutely watching, and Patrice hated that. She hated witnesses who weren't handpicked, so she straightened her shoulders and said, "Fine." And then she looked at me with that smile that isn't a smile, and she said, "Come back in and finish your little story." And the way she said it told me everything. She was baiting me. She wanted me back in that room under those chandeliers, back in front of those 40 people, because she wasn't done. She just needed a new angle. and I realized with a cold certainty that whatever she planned next was going to be bigger than the microphone stunt, because she'd already lost control once tonight, and she wouldn't accept that without trying to punish me for it. So I nodded once, calm, and I said, "I'm coming back in," and then I added, "But understand this, Patrice. Every time you escalate, you give me permission to open more," and her face twitched at the word open, because she knew there was still something in those documents I hadn't read aloud yet, something that could finish her socially, legally, or both. As we walked back toward the dining room door, Gary trailing behind like a man following a storm he helped create, Aunt Lenora close at my side, Tessa wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand like she was trying to hold herself together, I felt the weight of my clutch against my palm, and I knew the next minutes were going to decide everything, because Patrice wasn't just going to attack my identity now. She was going to attack my ownership, and when someone fights for property, they fight dirty, and I could already feel the next trap forming before the door even opened. The door to the private room swung open, and the sound hit me first, silverware clinking, polite laughter trying to recover, the kind of forced normal that happens when everybody just witnessed something ugly and nobody knows where to put their eyes. And then I stepped in, and 40 faces turned toward me at once like I'd walked into a spotlight I never asked for, and Patrice was already moving, already resetting the stage, gliding back toward the podium with that polished smile that screams, "I can control the narrative if I talk fast enough." And Gary slid into his chair with his shoulders curved inward like he wanted to disappear into the tablecloth, and Tessa hovered near the entrance like she wasn't sure if she belonged anywhere at this table anymore, and Aunt Lenora stayed close to me, not touching me, just present, the way real support shows up, quiet and unmovable. Patrice tapped the microphone again, but this time her voice went syrupy, sweet enough to rot teeth. "All right, everyone," she laughed lightly. "Little family moment, you know how it is." And a few people chuckled nervously because they wanted permission to pretend they weren't complicit. And then Patrice turned and looked straight at me, and she said, "Myra, sweetheart, why don't you finish?" And she put a tiny emphasis on sweetheart, like she was trying to reclaim the word, like she could rewrite 30 years with one fake endearment. I didn't rush, because rushing is what people do when they're afraid, and I wanted the room to feel how calm I was. I wanted every person there to feel the shift, because it's hard to call someone hysterical when they speak like a witness, not a victim. I stepped forward, set my clutch on the table in front of me, and I didn't open it yet. I just placed it there like a loaded truth sitting in plain sight, and I said, "Before I continue, I'm going to ask you all a simple question." And the room went still again, and I looked at the faces, the older couples, the family friends, the colleagues Patrice invited to make it look legitimate, and I said, "If you were at your own birthday dinner, and the person who raised you announced you were a tax benefit, laughed about it, and recorded your face while you processed it, would you call that love, or would you call that cruelty?" And you could feel people swallow, because now they had to take a side, and Patrice's smile tightened, because she hates when she can't hide behind. It's complicated. Someone on the far side of the table cleared their throat, and another guest glanced down at their napkin like it suddenly needed studying, and I let that discomfort sit, because discomfort is the honest reaction that shame tries to avoid. Then I said, "Now let's talk about what Patrice hinted at in the hallway," and Patrice's eyes flicked, a quick panic, and she snapped softly into the mic. "I didn't hint anything," and I replied, "You did, and you did it because you thought you could scare me." And I turned my body slightly so the whole room could see me, not as a kid being scolded, but as a grown woman anchoring herself in facts. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the certified copy of the will again, and I held it up just long enough for the seal to catch the light, because older audiences understand what seals mean. They understand what certified means. It's not just paper, it's process, it's proof. And I said, "This isn't rumor. It isn't emotion, it's documented." And Patrice tried to laugh. "Oh, honey, you think a piece of paper means?" And Aunt Lenora cut in smoothly. It means what the probate court says it means, and Patrice shot her a look like daggers, because Lenora had just removed Patrice's favorite playground, ambiguity. I took one slow breath and I said, the will becomes public in 2 weeks, but Patrice found out early, and Patrice's head snapped up. That's a lie. And I said, is it? And I looked at the room. Ask yourselves why a woman who's supposedly celebrating her daughter's birthday suddenly books the Sterling, invites 40 witnesses, and then chooses that exact night to humiliate her. And heads turned, people's eyebrows lifted, because once you name the pattern, it gets obvious fast. And Patrice's jaw clenched as she realized she couldn't pull the random honesty card anymore. I continued. She didn't do this because she wanted truth. She did it because she wanted leverage, and I watched Gary's face tighten because he knew what she'd planned, and he'd let it happen. Patrice leaned closer to the mic, voice sharpening. You're spinning stories because you're upset. And I said, no, I'm connecting dots you hope no one would connect. And then I did something small but devastating. I turned to Tessa, not accusing, not begging, just asking a question like a grown woman talking to another grown woman. Tessa, how many times did your mother tell you I was lucky to be here? And Tessa's throat bobbed. She whispered, a lot. And Patrice snapped, don't answer. That. But it was too late. The room heard it, the spell cracked. I set the will down and said, now here's the part Patrice didn't want you to hear. And I picked up Grandma Grace's handwritten letter, and I didn't read the whole thing. I read the lines that hit like truth does, clean and irreversible, and I watched faces change as I read, because people can dismiss anger, but it's harder to dismiss an old woman's handwriting saying, I watched you diminish her year after year. Patrice's mouth opened, then closed, because there's no good comeback to a dead woman's receipts. Then Patrice played her next card, the one she'd been building toward. Her voice dropped and she said, even if that will is real, Myra, you cannot legally keep that house. And the room tensed, because now we were in the money part, and money makes people pay attention, and Patrice continued, because you're not even really an Anderson. And she smiled like she'd just delivered a finishing blow. For a second there was silence, and I swear I could hear the hum of the HVAC and the soft fizz of someone's champagne settling, and inside my chest something went cold and focused, because this was the exact moment Grandma Grace warned me about, the moment my family would try to erase me to preserve themselves. I tilted my head and said, thank you. And Patrice blinked. For what? And I said, for saying it out loud in front of witnesses. And then I pulled out the smaller sealed packet, the one I hadn't opened until that night, and the room leaned forward like a single organism, and Patrice's face strained, because she recognized it. She knew what it was even if she'd never seen it. You don't fear an envelope like that unless you've been living with a secret long enough to feel it in your bones. Gary stood halfway, hands trembling. Myra, please, he muttered, and Patrice snapped, sit down. And then she turned back to me, voice shaking now. You don't want to do this. And I said, you did this. And I broke the seal with careful fingers, not dramatic, not sloppy, because this wasn't revenge. This was surgery. I slid out the first item, a lab report, folded and old, and I let my eyes move across it like I was reading it for the first time, even though I'd already felt the truth hit me earlier. And then I held it up just enough for the heading to be visible, and the room murmured when they saw the words DNA analysis. Patrice lunged forward, not all the way, but enough for the guests closest to her to flinch, and Aunt Lenora moved faster, placing a hand on Patrice's forearm and stopping her with a kind of strength only a woman who's done being polite has, and Lenora said quietly, don't. And Patrice hissed, get your hands off me. And Lenora replied, then sit down. I looked at Patrice and said, you called me adopted for a tax benefit. And then I looked around the table. But here's what my grandmother kept. And I tapped the report lightly with my finger. This was done when I was 2, and I didn't say the name yet, I let the suspense pull tight because the mind needs a second to brace for impact, and I said, "It confirms who my biological parent is." And Patrice's eyes flicked toward Gary like she was begging him to do something, anything, and Gary's face crumpled because he finally understood he was about to be exposed not as a victim, but as a participant. Tessa whispered, "Dad," and Gary swallowed hard like the word was stuck. I lifted the second item, an old photo, edges worn, the kind of photo that lived in a drawer for decades because it held a story someone didn't want remembered, and I held it toward the light and I said, "This is me." And then I added, "And this is my father." And Patrice shook her head violently. "No." And I said, "Yes." And my voice stayed steady, because steadiness is what makes people believe you. And I watched as the room's confusion turned into realization, as a few older relatives squinted and saw familiar eyes, as someone's lips parted in shock because they recognized a face they were told not to mention, and Patrice suddenly snapped into desperation. "This is private," she spat, and I replied, "You should have thought about that before you turned my identity into party entertainment." And then I took a breath and I said, "My biological father was Marcus." And the room erupted in noise. People talking over each other. Marcus. But I thought, and Patrice's hands gripped the edge of the podium so hard her knuckles whitened, and Gary sank back into his chair like his spine gave out, and Tessa stared at me like the ground shifted under her. I held my palm up and slowly the room quieted again, and I said, "And before anyone asks what that means for the estate, for the will, for who belongs where," and I looked directly at Patrice, "it means you built 30 years of cruelty on a lie you didn't even have the decency to keep private." And Patrice's mouth opened, and then she did something that told me I was right about everything. She didn't deny it. She went straight to bargaining. "We can fix this," she said quickly. "We can talk. We can," and I cut her off. "No, you don't get to fix what you proudly broke." And I looked around the room again and said, "Now here's the question I want you to answer, because I'm genuinely curious," and I paused. "Do you think a woman who can do this to someone at their own birthday dinner should be trusted to handle an inheritance dispute quietly?" And the room buzzed with uncomfortable agreement. And Patrice's eyes darted, searching for allies. But the faces were different now. The spell was gone. The audience wasn't hers anymore. And that's when Patrice's voice shook and she said, "You're trying to take everything from me." And I smiled, not mean, not triumphant, just truthful, and I said, "No, Patrice, I'm taking my name back." And as I said it, I felt something shift inside me, like a lock finally turned after decades, and I realized the next thing that had to happen wasn't just emotional, it was legal, because Patrice wasn't done. She was cornered, and cornered people don't suddenly become kind, they become reckless. And I could already see in her eyes she was about to make a move that would force me to use the last piece of my grandmother's evidence, the part one hadn't read yet, the part that wouldn't just embarrass her, it would expose what she did behind closed doors to keep control of that house long before tonight ever happened. Patrice didn't come at me with tears, she came at me with paperwork, because people like her don't feel guilt, they feel inconvenience. And the second she realized the room had turned on her, her brain did what it has always done, look for the quickest way to regain control, and she snapped her fingers at the waiter like he was a personal assistant and said, "Bring me my bag." And the waiter hesitated because the whole table had that frozen look now. The "do we intervene or do we pretend this isn't happening" look, and Patrice repeated it sharper. "My bag," and the waiter rushed off. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Patrice wasn't shaking from shame. She was shaking from calculation, and she kept glancing toward the door like she was timing an exit. And then she did that fake laugh again. Too loud, too bright. "Okay," she said into the microphone. "This is getting dramatic, and I don't want to ruin Myra's night." And I almost smiled because the nerve of that sentence could power a city. Ruin my night, as if she hadn't already taken a sledgehammer to it in public, and then Patrice turned to the room and started talking like she was a lawyer addressing a jury. "Let's be clear," she said. "This so-called will can be challenged." And she put air quotes on like ink, and witnesses were optional. "And this DNA thing." She waved her hand like facts were a fly she could swat. "Anyone can print anything these days." She was stalling, buying time, and then the waiter returned with a structured leather tote, and Patrice snatched it, flipped it open, and pulled out a manila folder that was already labeled in black marker, "Anderson Estate," as if she came to my birthday dinner with a legal strategy tucked beside her lipstick. That's when the room started to really understand this wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a planned ambush, a whole setup with props. Patrice held up the folder and said, "I anticipated we might need to address some misunderstandings," and she turned her gaze on me with that thin smile. "So, I brought documentation," and I could hear a couple guests inhale sharply, because now they saw the trap, and nobody likes feeling like they were invited to be extras in someone else's cruelty. Patrice opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers and started flipping like she was auditioning for a courthouse drama. "Here," she said, "receipts for renovations, invoices, proof I maintained that property for 2 decades, and proof I have a rightful claim to occupancy." And the way she said occupancy, like the house was a battlefield and she'd been occupying it like an army, made something hot rise in my throat. Gary didn't move. He just sat there with his eyes glossy, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes, and Tessa looked back and forth between her mother and me, blinking hard like she was trying to keep the room from spinning. Patrice slapped the papers on the table and said, "This is the reality, Myra." And she leaned closer, lowering her voice to a hiss only the nearest guests could hear, but the microphone still caught it. "You're not taking my life from me." And that sentence right there, that was the slip, because she didn't say "you're not taking the family's home." She said "my life." And if you've ever dealt with someone controlling, you know they tell on themselves when they're scared. I didn't touch her papers, not yet, because I've learned the hard way that when someone throws documents at you, they're not trying to inform you, they're trying to bait you into emotion. They want you to look unstable, ungrateful, dramatic, and Patrice had been rehearsing those labels for me since I was a child. So I did the opposite. I stayed calm. I looked at the papers like I was reading a menu, and I said, "Patrice, you renovated like you were redecorating a stage set, not maintaining a home." And a few people let out these involuntary little laughs because everyone at that table had seen her treat the estate like a showroom for her image. Patrice's eyes flashed. "Excuse me?" And I said, "You heard me." And then I turned to the guests. "Let me ask you something," and I let it hang. Have you ever watched someone spend money on something they don't own, and then act shocked when they're reminded they don't own it? And a man near the center of the table, silver hair, wedding ring, the kind of guy who looks like he's balanced a budget for 40 years, muttered, "That's not how ownership works." And Patrice stiffened because the older crowd doesn't respond to theatrics the way she's used to. They respond to common sense. Patrice tried to pivot, voice rising. "This is irrelevant." And I said, "No, it's the entire point, because you didn't invite people here to celebrate me. You invited them here to witness me being erased." And I looked around the table again. And now she's trying to erase me legally, too. Patrice snorted, "You're delusional." And I said, "Then explain the folder." And I pointed at it. "Explain why you walked into my birthday dinner with a labeled estate packet." And Patrice's mouth opened and closed, and she did what manipulators always do when cornered. She redirected to someone weaker. "Gary," she snapped, "tell them." And Gary flinched like she'd slapped him with her voice. For a second, I almost felt bad for him, because he looked like a man who'd been living under someone else's control for so long he forgot how to stand upright. But then I remembered every holiday meal he let her ruin, every time he looked away, every time I was the one expected to swallow it. Gary cleared his throat and said quietly, "Pat, stop." and the room went so quiet you could hear the ice in the glass settle. Patrice laughed, but it sounded cracked. "Stop what?" she said. "I'm protecting our family." And that was it. That was her magic phrase, protect our family, the phrase people use when they mean protect my power. I stepped closer, not aggressive, just firm, and I said, "If you were protecting family, you wouldn't have humiliated me for sport." And then I angled my body so the older guests could see my face, and I spoke directly like I was talking to neighbors across a fence. "You know what's funny?" I said, "People love to preach family loyalty, but they never preach it to the bully. They preach it to the person being bullied. They tell the target to be loyal to the person holding the knife." You could feel heads nodding, small, slow nods, because the 65-plus crowd has lived long enough to recognize that pattern, and Patrice could feel it, too. She could feel her audience slipping. So she reached into her bag again, and this time she pulled out her phone and held it up. "I have video," she said triumphantly. Video of Grace in her final months, confused, rambling, not herself, and she looked at the guests. "I can prove undue influence." Aunt Lenora's posture changed instantly, shoulders back, chin lifted. The way someone stands when they're done playing nice, and she said, "Patrice, do you really want to go there?" And Patrice snapped, "Yes," and Lenora replied, "Because if you go there, I go there, and you won't like where it ends." Patrice's eyes narrowed. "You don't have anything." And Lenora said, "I have more than you think." And she looked at me, not asking permission, just signaling now. My heart started beating faster, because I knew what she meant. The last thing in Grandma Grace's packet. The part one didn't want to use unless Patrice forced my hand, and Patrice was forcing it. She was about to smear my grandmother's mind to steal the house, and I felt something inside me go steel hard, because some lines don't get crossed, not without consequences. I reached into my clutch and pulled out one more document, thicker than the rest, folded into thirds, and I didn't show it yet. I just held it like a card face down at a poker table, and Patrice's eyes locked onto it immediately, pupil sharp, because she recognized the shape of something dangerous. I said, "Patrice, you keep saying this is about family," and I stepped closer. "So let's talk about what you did in the name of family, because you didn't just try to humiliate me tonight. You've been laying groundwork for years." Patrice scoffed, "Oh, please." But her voice was thinner now. I turned to the guests. "You all saw the dinner, but you didn't see the quieter things." And then I started listing them, not in a rant, in crisp scenes. The time she accidentally forgot my name on the holiday seating card and laughed when I sat at the wrong place, and then told everyone I was too sensitive. The time she told me I should be grateful because some kids don't get adopted at all, and she said it smiling like she'd done charity work. The time she encouraged Tessa to call me the project because I was, in her words, a complicated addition. Tessa's face crumpled and she whispered, "Mom," because hearing it out loud changed it. It turned it from normal into what it always was, cruelty. Patrice barked, "You're making things up." And I said, "No, I'm describing patterns." And then I lifted the folded document slightly, just enough for the top line to show, and a few people leaned forward to read it, and Patrice took a small involuntary step back, because she knew exactly what I was holding. I didn't open it yet. I made her sweat first, because she deserved to feel the suspense she tried to drown me in tonight. I said, "You want to challenge the will? Fine, but you should know Grace anticipated you." And Patrice's lips parted. "What?" And I answered, "She documented your behavior, your threats, your attempts to isolate her, and the way you pressured her about the estate." And Patrice's voice rose. "That's insane." And Lenora said calmly, "It's not." And she looked at the guests. "Grace asked me to keep copies." Patrice's eyes darted around the room, calculating, and I could practically see her doing math in her head. How many witnesses, who would talk, who would leak it, who would side with her if this blew up in Boston society. Then she did the one thing she never does, she pleaded, but it came out as anger. "Myra," she snapped, "if you release whatever that is, you will destroy this family." And I said, "No, Patrice." And my voice stayed quiet. "You destroyed it. I'm just done pretending it's intact." Patrice's hand tightened around her phone, and she glanced toward the door again, and I realized she wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to escape before the final truth landed, because she knew the moment I unfolded that paper, she couldn't rewrite anything anymore. I took a slow breath, and I unfolded the document halfway, and the first word stared back at me like a verdict, and Patrice's face went completely blank, the way it does when someone realizes they're finished, and the room leaned in, and even the waiters stopped moving, and I said, "All right." And I looked around at all 40 witnesses. "Since Patrice wanted honesty tonight, I'm going to give you the last piece." And my finger traced the line where my grandmother described the one thing Patrice did that wasn't just emotional abuse. It was a legal move, a move that could turn this from family drama into something the court takes very seriously. And as I opened my mouth to read it, Patrice whispered, barely audible, "Don't." Like a prayer, like a warning, like a confession. I unfolded the paper fully, and the sound of that crisp fold opening in a silent room was louder than Patrice's microphone had been all night, and I held it just high enough that people at the table could see Grandma Grace's signature at the bottom, because older folks know what a real signature looks like. They know the difference between shaky confusion and steady intention, and Patrice knew they knew, which is why she didn't try to laugh this time. She just stood there gripping her phone, like it was a life raft, and I read the first line out loud, slowly, cleanly, the way you read something when you want it to land like a gavel, to whoever is present when this letter is opened. And I paused, letting every pair of eyes go from me to Patrice, to my Uncle Gary, to my cousin Tessa, and then back to me again. And I kept reading, "I am writing this while fully competent and under no duress." And I watched Patrice's throat bob as she swallowed, because she could already see the trap closing. And then I read the next part. "If Patricia Whitfield ever claims I was confused, coerced, or manipulated, she is lying." And the word lying hit the room like a slap, because that's not how polite families talk. That's how truth talks when it's tired of being dressed up. Someone near the end of the table whispered, "Oh my God." And another person said, "Grace wrote this," like they needed to say it out loud to make it real. And Patrice's eyes went shiny, not from sadness, from panic, and I continued. "In the last 3 years, Patricia has repeatedly pressured me to change my estate plan, and she has threatened to isolate me from Myra if I refused." And now the room wasn't just watching a family argument anymore. They were watching a pattern, the kind of pattern seniors recognize immediately because they've read the headlines and they've seen it happen to their friends: the slow squeeze, the social isolation, the coercion dressed up as caregiving. Patrice finally found her voice, sharp and frantic. "This is outrageous." And I didn't even look at her. I just kept reading, because when you're holding the truth, you don't wrestle with noise. You let the truth do its job. On March 9th of last year, Patricia attempted to have me sign a new power of attorney while presenting it as routine medical paperwork, and the gasp that came out of the room was not polite. It was instinctive, and Patrice barked, "That's not what happened." And Aunt Lenora snapped, "Patricia, sit down." And Patrice spun toward her like a cornered cat. "You've always hated me." And Lenora replied, "No, I've always seen you." And that line right there made 2 women at the table exchange a look like they were thinking of their own sister-in-law, their own daughter-in-law, their own family parasite who uses love like a lever. I read the next paragraph and my hands stopped trembling completely, because something about finally speaking the full truth steadies you. I refused to sign, and Patricia became angry, and later that evening I found my checkbook missing from my desk drawer. And Patrice's face went slack, and I swear I could see her realizing she'd been caught doing something she'd convinced herself was invisible, and I turned the page and kept going. 2 checks were later discovered written to cash, totaling $18,000, and while Patricia claimed it was a misunderstanding, I have retained copies, bank statements, and the handwriting analysis I requested from the bank. And now the room was not on her side at all, because people can forgive a lot of family nonsense. They can even forgive cruelty if they're weak enough. But money theft from an elderly woman, that is where the switch flips. That's where even the most conflict-avoidant guests stop pretending, and Patrice's voice came out thin and strangled. Grace was confused, and I looked up for the first time and met her eyes dead on, and I said, "No, Patrice." She wasn't confused. She was careful. And then I read the sentence that made Patrice's knees visibly soften. If this letter is being read in front of witnesses, it is because Patricia has attempted a public humiliation campaign against Myra to force her out of the family and to weaken her position ahead of the will becoming public. And the room practically vibrated because now everyone understood the birthday dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a strategy meeting disguised as candles, and Patrice's mouth opened like she wanted to deny it. But how do you deny a dead woman predicting your playbook? I let the silence build, and then I added, "You see why Grandma Grace told me only to open this if absolutely necessary," and I lifted the page slightly, because she knew this exact night could happen. And then I turned to the guests, because this is where the comment section moment matters, and I asked, "Let me ask you straight. If you were sitting here tonight and you heard a grown woman announce her adopted daughter was just a tax deduction, and then you hear the grandmother predicting it, like a weather report, would you call that family or would you call that a setup?" And I let it breathe because when you put the moral question in the air, people have to answer it inside themselves. Patrice tried to move. I saw it. The subtle shift of weight toward the exit, and she grabbed her bag again, and I almost laughed. Because here's the thing about control freaks. When the narrative slips from their fingers, they don't stand and fight. They flee. And Patrice started doing the classic damage control shuffle. "Everyone," she said too loudly, "this is private." And one older gentleman near the end, the budget guy from earlier, said calmly, "Then why'd you bring a microphone?" And few people chuckled, not because it was funny, but because it was satisfying, and Patrice's cheeks flushed with rage. Tessa suddenly spoke, voice cracking. "Mom, did you take Grandma's checks?" And Patrice snapped, "No." Too fast, too sharp, and that's how you know it's a lie, because truthful people don't bark like that at their own child. And Uncle Gary stood up fully now, shoulders shaking, and he said, "Pat, stop lying." And Patrice whirled. "You're going to turn on me now." And Gary said, "I turned on the truth for 30 years and I'm done." And the room went silent again, because that wasn't a man fighting his wife. That was a man waking up in public. And it's ugly, but it's real. Patrice lunged toward me then, not physically attacking, but reaching for the papers like if she could rip them. She could rewrite them. And Lenora stepped between us with a calm that only older women possess when they've had enough, and she said, "Touch her, and I will call the police in front of everyone." And Patrice froze, because she knows the second the police come, the word elder exploitation enters the building, and that word doesn't leave. I gathered the documents back into my clutch with deliberate slowness, not rushed, not frantic, because speed looks guilty, and I wasn't guilty of anything except finally refusing to be the family's punching bag. And I said, "Patrice, you wanted me to run." And I looked at the guests again. That was the whole plan. Humiliate me, make me disappear, and then contest the will while I'm too ashamed to show up. And I turned back to her. "But here's what you miscalculated." And I tapped the clutch. Lightly. I came prepared. And then I made the quietest, most effective threat you can make in a room like that. And every person here is now a witness to your intent. Patrice's eyes darted around like she was searching for an ally, but the room had turned its back the way it turns its back on someone caught stealing from an old woman, and she finally did the thing she always does when she loses. She blamed me. "You ruined your own birthday." And I smiled, not sweet, just honest. "No." I said, You tried to ruin my life, and you failed." Patrice grabbed her bag and walked fast toward the door, heels clicking like angry punctuation, and someone actually moved their chair slightly as if to make space, like they didn't want her energy brushing their clothes, and she disappeared into the hallway, and the air in the room released like a pressure valve. I didn't cry yet, I didn't collapse yet, because adrenaline holds you upright, and I looked around at those 40 faces and said, if you ever watch someone get treated like an outsider in their own family, you just watch what happens when the outsider finally stops begging. And I let that sink in, and then I softened my voice just enough for the moral to land. And if you're listening and this feels familiar, please hear me. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival, and loyalty that requires your humiliation is not loyalty, it's control. Uncle Gary stepped closer, eyes wet, and he said, "Myra, I'm sorry." And I nodded once, because apologies are a start, not a finish line, and Lenora squeezed my hand and whispered, "Grace would have loved this." And that's when my throat tightened, because the one person who always made me feel real wasn't there to see it, but she'd engineered it anyway, like she was protecting me from beyond the grave. I picked up my clutch and I stood tall and I said, "All right." And I looked straight into the imaginary camera the way you do in these stories, like you're talking to one person at a time. Tell me in the comments, did Patrice cross the line? And be honest, if your mother did this to you at a birthday dinner, would you have walked out quietly? Or would you have read that letter out loud too? And then I added the question that makes the comment section explode. And do you believe family loyalty still applies when someone uses family as a weapon? I took a breath and I walked out of that restaurant with my head up, and behind me the guests finally started talking, not whispering about me, but whispering about her, because that's the part manipulators never anticipate. They think shame belongs to the target forever, but shame has a boomerang, and when you throw it hard enough at the wrong person, it comes back with interest. And here's the loop I'm leaving you with, because what happened after that dinner was not a clean ending. It was the beginning of a legal fight, a family collapse, and a truth about my adoption that Patrice had buried for decades. And the next time she tried to play victim, she made one mistake on a voicemail that turned this whole thing from gossip into evidence. And if you think tonight was wild, wait until you hear what she admitted when she thought nobody was recording, because that's when the real story finally snapped into focus. And that's the next video you need to watch if you want to see how a woman who built her whole identity on control reacts when the control is gone.